Okay, guys, you need to have out a clean piece of notebook paper. Go ahead and get it titled and dated. All right, today we are going to talk about applying the zero exponent rule. So when we have the exponent of 0, okay? In order to do that, I have to explain why this works, and then we will get to what the rule actually is, okay? So if I gave you 3 squared over 3 squared, okay, we would need to use the quotient property, so what you did in the last video, to simplify this, okay? This also means the same thing as 3 times 3 over 3 times 3. Yesterday, remember, we said that if you take 2 and you subtract the other exponent, then we get our final answer. So we move that up there and we subtract it. So we would get 3 to the 0 power over 1. Okay? In expanded form, 3 times 3 over 3 times 3. And remember, we said that we could cross cancel these. Okay? So since the exponent is telling us how many of the bases to write down, and this tells me to write down no bases, we have to write down something. In math, we always use a placeholder of 1. So since there's nothing left on top and there's nothing left on bottom, I have to hold the place with something. So we would hold the place with 1, and 1 over 1 is simply 1. Guys, that's the same thing as if I gave you the fraction 4 over 4 and I said simplify that, you should all be able to tell me that 4 over 4 is the same thing as 1. Because they're the same thing, they basically cancel each other out and equal 1. That's 1 whole. So 4 pieces of pizza, out of 4 pieces of pizza, that's 1 whole pizza. So that's how we get the value of 1. The same rule applies when it comes to exponents. Okay, so any time that we have, so if we took 4 to the 7th over 4 to the 7th, because these are the exact same, they would basically cancel each other out and become 1. That's the same thing as mathematically working it out to where we subtract the exponents just like we did yesterday. We leave a 1 on bottom, 4 to the 0 power. And guys, if you typed in 4 to the 0 power, your calculator is going to tell you that it's 1. So our final answer, no matter what, is just 1. So as a rule, any base that is raised to the 0 power becomes 1. Okay? And I'm going to leave that up there as we go through a few examples. All right, so if I have the value 6 to the 0 power, okay, this is telling me how many 6's to write down, okay? That's what the exponent does. If it was 6 squared, that would mean 6 times 6. We would multiply the 6 twice. Since the exponent is 0, it's telling me don't multiply it any times, okay? So it equals 1. There's nothing there, so it's 1. All right, now one of the biggest confusions is when we have a problem that looks like this, okay? Because the exponent is only applied to the base that is directly in front of it. Here, the base is this entire part that is inside of the parentheses. So the base, which is parentheses -2, is what's being raised to 0 power. So that entire thing goes away and becomes 1. these parentheses are holding this negative in with this 2 and telling us that that's what the base is. Over here on this second one, this negative is not attached to that 2. So right now, the only thing that's getting raised to 0 power is the 2. The negative is not with the 2 because it doesn't have parentheses around it. So 2 to the 0 power is going to become 1. But then that negative is still there. So that still comes to our final answer. So this final answer would be -1. Guys, we could even rewrite this as -1 times 2 to the 0 power. And then 2 to the 0 power we know is 1, and -1 times 1 is -1. This part right here is probably one of the most confusing things. Okay, so if that negative is not inside of the parentheses with that number, it is not attached to that number. Okay, so applying our 0 exponent rule, 5 to the 0 power is going to become 1, and then 8 is not being applied the 0 power, so it's just going to come over in my final answer. So that my final answer is 1/8. Let's do this one, -14 to 0 power. So again, the 14 is what's being raised to 0 power. So that's going to become 1. This negative is not being applied to the 14, so it has to come down to our final answer. So our final answer in this one is a -1. Guys, when you bring your notes to me this time, I'm going to question you on this rule. You're going to have to explain this to me because I have to make sure that you understand what you're doing. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to look for is if there's anything I can combine using the multiplication rule, the product rule, or the quotient rule. And since these are all different bases, I can't combine any of them. So 4 to the 4th power, it's going to stay there. 3 to the 0 power is going to become 1. So I'm going to put a 1 up there in its place. And then 6 squared doesn't have anything to combine with, so it's just 6 squared. Now because 4 to the 4th times 1 is going to equal itself, we can rewrite this as 4 to the 4th over 6 squared. Because anything times 1 is itself. Okay, so I'm throwing some of the other properties back in there because we're going to have to start combining them, okay? So the first thing I notice is that I have the base of 6 2 different times. I know that I can combine those using the product rule, okay? So since they're being multiplied, okay, I keep the base the same, and I'm going to have to add the exponents to combine them. So 3 plus 2 is 5. And then I have the same base of 4. So I'm going to take 8 plus 8 to get 4 to the 16th. Okay, so just a reminder about all those other rules you've already learned, okay, because I'm going to start throwing all of them at you. All right, one last one. So this is the quotient rule because they're being divided. So I have the same base of 2. And remember, you always take the smaller base and move it to the larger. So I'm going to take 7 minus, and that's a -4. So 7 minus a -4 is actually 2 to the 11th. And then I'm going to take 2 minus 2 because we have the same base of 5. And 2 minus 2 is 0. And then we have to apply the 0 property. 5 to the 0 power is going to equal 1. So we have 1 over 2/11ths. So that had the quotient property and the 0 power property in that problem. All right, I'm going to give you your 4 practice problems. Make sure that you work these out on your notes, and then make sure you're ready to talk to me about the 0 property whenever you bring me your notes. All right, there you go.